Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about all of the books that I read this year. I read 15 books. I did have a Goodreads and Storygraph goal of 20 books, but unfortunately I don't think I'm going to be able to make it to that. But I did want to talk about the books that I did read, particularly the ones that I read before I started this channel. Because I don't want this video to be 50 hours long, I'm not going to go too in depth into every single book, especially the ones that I already talked about, but I will give you my thoughts on them. Another thing you need to know about me is that I'm kind of bad at giving ratings. I feel like a lot of the books that I rated here are sitting around like 2.5, 3 stars, 3.5 at most. So I'm not really going to talk about the star rating for a lot of them. However, because I did want this video to be just a little bit more engaging, I am going to be rating them from worst to best. So let's start with the saddest pile, the DNF pile. First book that I DNF'd this year was Watching You by Lisa Jewell. To be completely honest, I do not remember a whole lot about this book, which is probably saying a lot. It starts off with someone getting murdered in a kitchen, but we don't know who it is that got murdered, nor who did it. This book kind of tells about the events that lead up to this murder. Our main character's name is Joey, and she feels very out of place in this kind of highfalutin, like, area of town that she lives in. Yeah, I honestly don't remember too much about this book. I do remember being engaged towards the beginning of it, and then as we got towards the middle, I just couldn't force myself to keep reading because I was really, really bored. I just kept finding myself forcing myself to pick the book up, and after a while, I was like, you know what? No, I am not going to continue with this book. I did look up the spoiler though, because I wanted to see how it ended, and I'm really, really happy that I didn't stick around for that spoiler because I just would have been very disappointed. The next book that I DNF is actually by the same author, Lisa Jewell, and it is Then She Was Gone. I didn't go into this book expecting not to like it because of the experience I had with the previous book. I really did go in totally unbiased. I was actually really excited for this one because I heard really good things about it. Our main character, Laurel, is dealing with the disappearance of her teenage daughter. It kind of shifts perspective from when this daughter was younger to after she went missing. Laurel then meets this guy one day randomly who's super charming and kind of sweeps her off her feet, and she is introduced to his daughter who reminds her a lot of her own daughter that disappeared. That's really all I'm going to say about this book. The reason why I decided to DNF it was because all I had to do was read the flap of the book and know exactly what happened from the book because I guessed it based on what the flat said. I really hoped that I was wrong because I was like, there's no way they're going to give away and hint so much at what could have happened in the book, but they did. And I just didn't feel like doing the work to read on to see how we got there. I just felt a lot of stuff that happened just was kind of cliche and predictable, and I just wasn't enjoying myself. So I DNF'd it, looked into what the spoiler was, and I was pretty much right. I guess this author just isn't for me. I guess I just don't like her storytelling style or anything like that, so I probably won't be picking anything else by her up anytime soon. The next book that I DNF'd was Over the Summer, and it was Book of Night by Holly Black. I did do kind of a more in-depth review of that on a previous video. I will leave the link to that in the cards up above if you wanted to go into that. This book pretty much is about a woman named Charlie who is living in a world where there is shadow magic pretty much. You can control your shadow by use of shadow magic, and it is pretty interesting. I forgot a lot of the specifics about the book, honestly, but she pretty much used to be like a thief of sorts, and then she decided to kind of leave that life and work at a bar. But then she's roped into by someone who used to employ her when she was a thief into stealing this very important book that has secrets to shadow magic called the Book of Night. Told in dual perspectives, and I remember really enjoying reading the chapters the about Charlie's past, but the present chapters when she was trying to solve the mystery behind this Book of Night, I really just was not engaged or interested in, and I decided to DNF it because there was another point where I was forcing myself to pick up the book and read. I just wasn't really engaged. This was my first Holly Black book, and based on what I read, I really do think she's a good writer. It's just the story just didn't hold my attention at all. The narrator I also thought was very pitying and kind of dramatic about that towards Charlie, and I read some passages about that in the review that I posted in the wrap up that I did, but yeah, I just didn't really enjoy the point of view. The fact that it wasn't first person point of view, it was from a third person narrator. I think it would have been a lot more effective if it was by Charlie's point of view. But yeah, that was my thoughts on the Book of Night. And then finally, the final book that I DNF'd was pretty recent in November. It was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This book is about our main character, Darrow, who is in a class of people called the Reds, which is pretty much the lowest caste system in a society where people are pretty much put into classes based on what color category they belong to. And I'm going to be completely honest, I thought that it was by the color of their blood, but then I remember reading a portion where someone from the highest caste system had red blood. So I honestly don't know what the caste system is. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I was pretty confused by a lot of the random, terms that were thrown in so quickly in the beginning of the book. And I understand that you need that in order to build a world and stuff, but it was just so much coming at me at once. I just couldn't keep up and really didn't care to. I even tried to take notes on my phone, which I understand like there's working well when you're reading a fantasy book or dystopian or something like that, but I just was not interested. I think what was worse though was the fact that I really did not connect with Darrow. I thought he was very, very arrogant. In fact, I believe I categorized him as a Gary Stu, which is the male equivalent of a Mary Sue, which I really was not a fan of at all. And again, like the same thing that I said about the other three books that I DNF'd, I was forcing myself to pick it up, and who wants that? So I just decided to DNF it at that point. Alrighty, so here we go. We're going to go into the books that I actually did finish in 2022. So we are going to start off with the first few books that I think were absolutely awful. Then we're going to go into books that are more like lukewarm territory. And then finally, we will end with the best books. So by far the worst book that I have read this year is Verity by Colleen Hoover. This is my first Colleen Hoover book. I haven't read any books by her, and judging by the style of writing, I will not be picking up any other books by her. I just saw this book in Walmart. I believe it was December of 2021 or maybe January. It was the first book that I completed, so it was very sad that the first book that I completed of this year ended up being the worst, and it should have been a sign of what was to come because I really didn't have the best reading year. But anyway, yeah, I thought that the premise was really interesting and I loved the cover, so I decided to pick it up. This book is about our main character, Lowen. She is commissioned to finish the rest of a series that a very famous author named Verity Crawford isn't able to finish because she has gotten injured. She moves into the home of Jeremy Crawford and Verity Crawford. Jeremy is Verity's husband. So she starts to read through outlines and notes on the books that she is to finish and finds a manuscript, which is very disturbing, about an autobiography that Verity was working on at the time when she was injured. She doesn't show this to Jeremy, though, Verity's husband, because she's starting to have feelings for him. I really think it was the fact that I didn't like the writing. We start off with a guy getting hit by a car and pieces of his body being splattered all over him. And she runs into Jeremy, who gives her his shirt, and then she goes to this meeting, and oh, surprise, surprise, Jeremy is Verity's husband, and she's going to be working with him. I just thought that it was very extra. I didn't find it entertaining or anything like that at all. I just kind of rolled my eyes when I read it, and it's like, oh yeah, of course. So this guy that she has chemistry with is the guy that she's going to be working with. Like, what are the odds? Stuff like that just annoys me when it comes to storytelling. The thing that I did like about this book, though, was the parts of the manuscript that Verity wrote, this autobiography. I really did think that there was good writing there, and I liked Verity's voice, and I was very entertained. But the part that was from Laurel's point of view, I just could not stand. And there's a twist at the end, and I guessed it. You are going to hear me say this a lot, that I guessed the end of the book, and it's not because I'm trying to, show off or anything, or say that, oh, I'm psychic or whatever. It's nothing like that. It's just I tend to pick up on context clues really easily, and I'm a writer myself, so I'm kind of familiar with writing devices and storytelling devices, and I think that that has helped me. Did any other person out there who finished this book guess the twist at the end? Just please tell me I'm not alone with that. I don't know. It was a chore getting through this book, and I am surprised I didn't DNF it. I think if I didn't go out and spend money, I would have DNF'd it. The second worst book that I ended up finishing was Hotel Magnifique by Emily J. Taylor. I actually filmed a rant when I completed this book back in June. I'm probably going to be posting that. The reason why I haven't is because I was pretty much reading from a summary that I wrote on it, and you can pretty much tell that I read it. And I feel like parts of me was maybe even a little bit cruel, but I worked really hard on writing and filming that review, and I spent a lot of time on it. So even though it's been over half a year at this point since I filmed it, I think I am going to post it because I just have so much to say about how much I did not like this book. But the summary of it is pretty much, we have Janny, who's 17 years old, and her sister Zoza. They end up working at this mysterious hotel which travels somewhere else in the world at midnight. Pretty much you can only really stay there if you're rich because it's super expensive, but they end up getting jobs there. And the book is pretty much about them trying to, well, more so Janny, unlock the secrets of the hotel and the man that is in charge of it, because it seems to have some pretty cruel secrets. I think my big problem with this book was the fact that I found Janny absolutely insufferable. She was whiny and just rude and mean, and really had no consequences for that at all. She was really rude to the guy who was supposed to be her love interest. His name was Belle, and there were just so many double standards with their relationship, and it was kind of one of those things where things just kept happening kind of in a loop. Like, they would start to get close, and then she's like, oh, don't come near me. And then she would get in trouble, and then he would suddenly be there, and then this would happen over and over again. I think there's a instance where she actually stomped her foot because she was pissed. And we're not talking about an 8-year-old girl here. We're talking about someone who is 17. Yeah, I just did not like the book at all. And it's really sad because the cover was absolutely amazing. The premise sounded so much like it was going to be so much fun. And I just ended up not liking this book at all. Next up, we have A Forgery of Roses by Jessica S. Olson. This book had such an interesting premise, and I was so excited to read it. So when I started to be like, oh, I don't think I'm going to like this book, I was super disappointed. This book is about a girl named Myra who is an artist, and she has this very special talent where what she paints in regards to a person is able to happen to the real person. For example, at the beginning of the book, there is a dog, and its paw or foot, I believe, is injured. And so she painted a picture of the dog and painted the foot so it was well and the dog was healed. in real life. So that's kind of what her ability is. And so someone who works in the governor's office, who actually the governor's wife, she finds out about this talent that Myra has and wants Myra to paint her son back to life. I thought that this was going to be such a good book because there's kind of a mystery element to it. We're trying to figure out who it was that killed the son, and then there was this really cool magic element to it. Unfortunately, I just didn't like the way it was executed. I think the biggest part for me that was really annoying was the cringe romance between Myra and the governor's other son, who is still alive. I honestly cannot remember his name. I didn't like the way they went about trying to solve the mystery. I actually found myself being bored in some cases. Yeah, it just wasn't really my cup of tea. Here we are crossing into the territory of kind of what I'm going to call the lukewarm books. They were just okay, hovering around the 2 to 3 star rating. Next up, we have the Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. This book is about Shay, who has a blog called the Book of Cold Cases, and she one day runs into this woman named Beth Greer, who is a serial killer from her town, and she kind of strikes up a friendship with her, and the book is pretty much about Shay trying to figure out if it really was Beth who killed these people. I believe it was 2 men. Um, yeah, so it's about her talking with this serial killer, I guess. I don't want to give too much away because of the twist, but all I'm going to say is that this was my first book by this author, and I wish I had known the type of book that she wrote. Otherwise, I wouldn't have picked up this book at all. I really, really loved the first half of the book. But then once we got towards the second half of the book, I did not like it at all. The twist could have been removed, I think, and it would have been a good book. Also, the name of the book is the Book of Cold Cases, but we rarely hear about this blog. I go into more detail in my review of in the wrap up that I did that this book was featured in, as well as A Forgery of Roses, and if you wanted to really see more about that. But yeah, not much to say about this book. The next book that is on my list is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I recently did a kind of quick review in my most recent video, so I'm not going to go too much into this one again, but the thing that I didn't like about this book, again, very similar to the Book of Cold Cases, is the twist, and it just killed the entire book for me. I really liked the beginning. I thought there was some great character development of our main character, Casey, and her kind of budding friendship with Catherine, who is an actress that Casey's pretty much is spying on through the windows of her house with a pair of binoculars. But the twist just totally killed it for me. And I feel like that's a common theme in a lot of the books. You know, they started out great, but then once we got to the ending, it just really, really fell flat. Next, we have Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. This was my first book by this author, and I heard about it, I believe, on a random YouTube video more towards the beginning of the year. And I looked up the summary online and thought it sounded awesome. So when I went to Barnes and Noble to buy some books, it was definitely on my list. I really liked the first few chapters of this book, but then as we started to learn what it was that was going on, I thought it was very predictable, and I honestly couldn't tell you too much about what happened in a lot of the book. I can't even remember what our main character's name is. It's Claire. But anyway, Claire reconnects with her sister named Lydia, who she had a falling out with, and after our main character's husband dies, she somehow gets involved with her sister and trying to solve the mystery of the disappearance of their other sister who disappeared years ago. Again, I couldn't tell you too much about the plot itself. I remember a few of the twists, and I wasn't that impressed with the ending, nor was I impressed with the explanation for what happened to the sister who went missing. I remember being bored for a lot of the book, especially towards the middle. If I didn't spend any money on this book, I probably would have DNF'd it. The next book we have is The Ivory Key by Akshay Raman. I apologize if I'm butchering that name. Seidel with me. I was initially super excited about this book because it was marketed as a book where the four characters who were siblings were coming together to find this artifact that controls magic in their kingdom and doing things like solving puzzles to do so. But when it came to that part of the book, that wasn't really the case. I really liked the beginning of the book and reading about the siblings and their relationships with each other and learning about the history of the Ivory Key. But once we got to the actual journey of looking for the Ivory Key, I feel like the plot felt really, really rushed, almost as if there was a deadline that the author needed to meet and it was like an overnight deadline. There were these aspects of the book that had really high stakes throughout the book, and I feel like overall they amounted to nothing with little to no payoff. I'll put a link up above to my July wrap up where I will go into a little bit more in depth into it, but yeah, not too much to say about this book. The next book that I'm going to talk about is also going to be linked above for my July wrap up if you really want me to go, into it, and if you want to hear my spoilery thoughts on the book. But that book is The Starless Crown by James Rowlands. This book is following multiple characters throughout who pretty much go on different journeys but are ultimately all driven by our character named Nyx, who foretells the end of the world pretty much. There were parts of this book where I was really engaged, but for the most part, I was bored a lot of the time. There were a lot of battle scenes and a few chase scenes, and I really am not entertained by that. And rather than being entertained, I found myself skipping over them because they really didn't add to the book. And there was one point where I believe a character had to run across a field and or like a battleground or something, and I was like, oh no, because I was pretty sure we were going to get a description of this person running and their thoughts as they did so, and that is exactly what we got. This book is the first in a series, and I do not think I am going to be picking up any more books in the series. I was really disappointed because I had really high expectations for this book. The next book I have here is The Maid by Nita Prose. There was a lot of hype around this book, and I really liked the premise of it when I read about it, and even read a little sample of the book before I bought it. And I really liked what I was reading, so shortly after it came out, with a few other books on this list and the whole I was talking about earlier, I went out and bought it. This book is about a woman named Molly who works as a maid at a hotel. She kind of has some issues understanding social cues and sometimes can misconstrue situations and what people are saying. One day she is cleaning one of the rooms that in the hotel, and she finds the body of one of the guests in the hotel. Of course, people start to suspect her for killing this man. I thought I was going to read this book in a few sittings in, consecutive days with not being able to put the book down, but that really didn't happen. I couldn't really put my finger on as to why, and although I was really enjoying a lot of the book, like a lot of books on this list, when I got to the end, I was unbelievably disappointed. I don't like who the culprit ended up being. I don't like the trope that was used at the end. I just didn't like it at all. I had a good time with the book before it got to the ending, though. I enjoyed it a lot more than a lot of the other books on this list. The next book I have here is Nine Lives by Peter Swanson. I read the premise of this book and thought it sounded so interesting, and I was going to wait for a library copy, but it was a Sunday night and I just couldn't wait to get it from the library, so I just went out and bought it. This book is about nine people who get a list mailed to them with their name and the names of eight other people. And then one by one, each person starts to get murdered. There is a police detective whose name is also on the list. Her name is Jess, who notices this and tries to solve the mystery as to what's going on. I know there were a lot of people who thought the characters were maybe boring or pretentious and thought that a lot of the book was boring, but for me, I was really entertained when I was reading a lot of this book. There were a lot of memorable quotes, and I read a good chunk of it in one sitting. I do, however, share a thought that a lot of people seem to have, which is how can everyone who starts to investigate this list not know the connection between all of these people? I was able to put it together rather quickly. I thought the motive for the murder and who was doing it was a little bit of a letdown, but in the very last chapter, after it is revealed what happened and everything like that, that is what really killed it for me. Something happened that I thought really cheapened an event that had happened earlier in the book, and it was a cliche. I believe we were supposed to be happy to read about it, but I just was not happy at all. I rolled my eyes. Besides that, though, I really did enjoy a lot of this book. Next up, we have Yinka, Where Is Your Husband by Lizzie Demlola Blackburn. Sorry if I butchered that. This book is about a woman named Yinka who is trying to find a date in time for her cousin's wedding because in her family, which is a British Nigerian family, there is a lot put into whether or not a woman is married. This book is more of a contemporary book, and I was really reading outside of the type of book that I usually read, but I really was entertained and really was engaged during this book. I did like a lot of members of Yinka's family. The aspects of this book that bothered me, though, were kind of nitpicky. Yinka is at the point where she goes on a dating app, and being someone who has used dating apps in the past, the way the author describes the way one of them is used is not actually how the app works. I believe the app was Hinge, and she kind of described it as being more of a Tinder mechanism, and that's not really how it works. There also is a time jump at one point and a situation that we spent a lot of time reading about, pretty much brushed over, and the situation just gets one throwaway line about it after having so much time invested into it. And there was a part at the end of the book that pretty much read to me like the end of a movie, and for some reason that really annoyed me. But overall, I really enjoyed this book a lot more than I thought I was going to, and I'm pretty happy that I purchased it. Next up, we have Scythe by Neil Shusterman. I heard about this book series really recently, actually, and I kind of couldn't believe that I hadn't heard about it before this year because there seems to be a lot of hype around it. I ordered the books immediately once I heard about it because I was like, I just need to see what this is about. I'm not a huge dystopian reader, but the premise of it just sounded so awesome to me. In this world, we have pretty much conquered death. So, if, say, you have a deadly disease or you jump off a building, you can't die. I said that with such a finality. You can't die. But yeah, so pretty much that's what's going on in this world. So, in order to keep the population down, because obviously can't have an unlimited amount of people running around. There are these people who are called sides, and they pretty much kill people, and they have the ability to kill people for good. This book is about two teenagers named Citra and Rowan who pretty much become side apprentices. I really did like this book. I was entertained by a lot of it. I loved the characters. I really loved the villain, and I loved Faraday, who is one of the sides. He's pretty much the mentor. Absolutely loved him. However, one part of the book that I really didn't like was the romance. It was pretty much insta love. Of course, at the beginning of the book, they hate each other, and then by the end of the book, they're saying, I love you. And I don't think that's a spoiler. It's pretty obvious when reading the book that they are going to end up together. But I just think this is the type of book where you don't need a romance. There's so much going on, but I mean, it's there. I just didn't enjoy reading about that aspect of the book. For the most part, though, I really did enjoy it. However, I don't know if it's going to make it into my top series of all time. Like I feel like a lot of people are saying. I don't necessarily want to say that I don't see what all the fuss is about because I really did enjoy myself, but I don't know. I guess I just had a little bit of higher expectations for it. I actually finished this book in March or April, and I have not yet moved on to the next book in the series. I really do have to read it soon, though, before I completely forget what happens in the first book. Now we are headed into the top three books, which is pretty much the cream of the crop. Coming in at number three, we have The Paris Hours by Alex George. This book was on my radar for a few years, and I was finally able to buy it earlier this year. It follows four people over the course of a single day and how their lives eventually intertwine at the end of the book. There are some flashbacks given to their past, and we learn more about them throughout the book. I really thought the writing in this book was super beautiful, and I loved reading about the characters and their histories. I read this book back in February, and I still remember a lot more about it than some of the other books that I read later on in the year, so I think that is saying a lot. There are some historical figures in the book, so if you like historical fiction, there is a little bit of that in here, so you may enjoy that. While I love the journey that it took to get there, surprise, surprise, I wasn't a fan of the ending. It's not that it was necessarily bad, I just think that the marketing of the book overhyped the ending. It's said to be this explosive ending, and to tell you the truth, I didn't see what the big deal was. And I was able to guess what the twist was because of one line that was given in the middle of the book or so, based on the words the author used. Again, I'm not trying to say that in a bragging way or anything. In fact, I hope that some more of you were able to guess what was going on too. And if that's the case, please let me know in the comments below. But yes, overall, this definitely was one of the better books that I read this year for sure. I'm glad I have the book. I will be reading it again, and I would recommend it. The second best book that I read this year was The Twyford Code by Janice Hallett. One of my favorite parts about this book is the format of the book. I absolutely love books that are told in different formats, and this one was no exception. Not only that, though, the story of it was super interesting. It starts out with a letter from a detective inspector asking someone to listen to these audio files. The person who recorded them has recently gone missing, and his name is Steve. He found this book by an author named Edith Twyford, and his English teacher, Ms. Isles, believes that the book is the key to solving a code that is said to have been through all of Twyford's books. However, Miss Isles ends up going missing. It's so cool though. I just think it's so cool that it's like kind of like interactive. Like at the beginning, it shows a little bit about, I don't even think you can see, but it shows a little bit of the transcription service, and then it even has a little key of what means what. I just thought this was an awesome book. I absolutely loved the plot. I was engaged. I pretty much couldn't put the book down. The only thing I will say about the book that kept it from being a 5-star read is the ending. I just couldn't really understand one aspect of it, and maybe that shouldn't knock it down to not being a 5-star read because I did enjoy the book so much. I don't know, there was just a few parts that kind of confused me towards the end. I shouldn't say that I didn't like the whole ending. I really liked the twist. That I will say. I absolutely loved the twist. There was just this one aspect of it I said that I was kind of confused about. Maybe I'll just reread it. I'll reread the ending and everything will be fine and dandy. I would absolutely recommend this book. Now we have my number one book that I read this year, and that is The Appeal by Janice Hallett. Yes, this is the same author that wrote The Twyford Code. I actually discovered this book first. So I was pretty much at Barnes & Noble. I was not there to buy books. I was just there to do some work, and I just happened to walk past and I saw this cover and it appealed to me. I will show myself out, I'm sorry. But yeah, anyway, so I read the synopsis of the book, and what drew me in was the format of the book, the way the book was told. This is an epistolary novel, and it is told through a series of emails, texts, and I think there's a few voice messages in here too. The book follows about 15 or so characters. It's about a fundraiser for a girl named Poppy who is unfortunately very sick. Each of the characters in this book are in the town play, so a lot of the emails are pretty gossipy, talking about what's going on. And then someone is found murdered, but we don't know who it is that was found murdered until later on in the book. If any of you guys know of any more epistolary novels, please let me know. The book starts similar to the Twyford Code with a letter saying, hey, look over these documents and let me know what you think. It's delivered to these two lawyers. Throughout the book, there are annotations in the form of little post-it notes that kind of help you remember who people are, and just notes as to, like, just little things that you should pay attention to, but it doesn't hold your hand in any way. And then there are some text messages. One of the criticisms I read of this book is that there are a lot of characters, and I personally never really have issues dealing with a lot of characters for the most part. In this novel, I didn't anyway. But if you do have issues, you can always refer to the cast list that I showed you with all the post-it notes on it, and it is very helpful. There were times in this book where I laughed super hard out loud. I thought it was super funny at parts. And while the ending kind of left something to be desired, in that there was a trope that I feel like is being used so much lately, I couldn't let it taint the rest of the book for me in the way the other books that I mentioned have, because I just enjoyed this book so much. I read it in one day. I believe I started on a Saturday afternoon and I finished on Sunday afternoon. There also was a twist regarding one of the characters that I didn't really see coming. I noticed something about her, I made a guess, but I was completely wrong. And I love it when I'm wrong when it comes to twists. Well, for the most part, not really in an example like The House Across the Lake. I just thought the book was so good. One of the criticisms that I will agree with that I've been seeing a lot is the fact that it's kind of weird that these people in the books communicate so often through email. There's this one instance where one of the people sent an email to someone instead of a text, which was kind of weird to me. I think that there are texts in other aspects of the book between the lawyers, so I don't understand why we couldn't have gotten that for the characters, like the people who are involved in the murder, like the suspects. But honestly, it didn't bother me that much. I was enjoying the story too much to really pay attention. So yeah, as you can tell, after I read this book, I went and got the Twyford Code. So that is kind of how that list was set up. Janice Hallett is one of my new favorite authors, and I cannot wait to read the next book that she has coming out, which is actually coming out in January. But yeah, anyway, so this is my number one pick for 2022, The Appeal by Janice Hallett. And if you can kind of suspend your disbelief a little bit as far as the fact that everyone is emailing all the time rather than doing other things like texting, I really do think that people who enjoy crime novels will really enjoy this. So there you have it. These are all the books that I was able to read in 2022, plus the library books that I don't have the physical copies of. It was 15 books that I was actually able to finish, and then 3 DNFs. So it wasn't the best reading year, so I'm really hoping that 2023 is going to be a little bit better, but there were some gems in the rough. Feel free to let me know what your favorite and least favorite books of the year were, and what you thought of any of these books if you read them. I've got another video coming out really soon. It is going to be my most anticipated books of January 2023, so stay tuned for that, and I will talk to you guys really soon. Bye.